The man entered the restaurant at 12:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Not during the lunch rush when servers are frantic and mistakes get buried in chaos. Not during the quiet evening hours when desperation for customers softens judgment. He chose the precise moment when a restaurant reveals its true nature. Busy enough to test efficiency, calm enough to observe character. The hostess barely glanced up from her phone as he entered. A mumbled, "Sit anywhere," escaped her lips before she returned to scrolling. He noted this. Everything about her posture screamed indifference. The slouched shoulders, the bitten nails, the way her eyes never quite focused on the people in front of her. He chose a table near the kitchen, not the comfortable booth by the window, not the corner table that offered privacy. Table 14, cracked laminate surface, wobbly leg compensated by folded cardboard, positioned perfectly to observe the entire operation. The restaurant was called Sabor Casero, home flavor. The irony wasn't lost on him. Nothing about this place felt like home. The walls were that particular shade of yellow that suggested the paint had been white once, decades ago. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead with the persistence of tinnitus. The floor tiles were clean but permanently stained, bearing the ghost marks of 1,000 spilled drinks and dropped plates. A young woman approached his table. She couldn't have been more than 25, though her eyes carried the weariness of someone much older. Her uniform, a black button-down shirt and slacks, was immaculate despite obvious wear. The collar had been turned and re-sewn to hide fraying. The pants had been hemmed by hand. He could see the uneven stitches if he looked closely, but everything was pressed. Everything was clean. She set down a laminated menu with a smile that reached her eyes. "Good afternoon. Can I start you with something to drink?" Her voice carried genuine warmth, not the rehearsed cheerfulness of someone working for tips. There was a difference. He had spent 40 years in business learning to distinguish between authentic kindness and transactional politeness. "Just water, please." "Of course. I'll give you a moment with the menu." He watched her walk away. She stopped at table 9 where an elderly couple was struggling to read the small print. Without being asked, she pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and held it steady while they decided. The old man smiled gratefully. She touched his shoulder gently before moving on. He opened the menu. The prices were modest but not suspiciously cheap. This wasn't a place trying to undercut competition through quality shortcuts. It was simply a neighborhood restaurant serving working people who counted their money carefully. He counted 7 seconds, not because he needed time to choose, because he wanted to observe how she handled other tables in his peripheral vision. Table 6, 3 construction workers still in their dusty clothes. She didn't wrinkle her nose at the smell of concrete and sweat. Table 12, a mother with 2 small children who had already spilled a glass of juice. She cleaned it without the exasperated sigh he'd seen countless servers make. Table 3, a businessman in an expensive suit snapping his fingers at her. She walked over with the same pleasant expression, though he noticed her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. When she returned to his table, he looked up from the menu. "What's the cheapest item you have?" She blinked. For just a moment, surprise flickered across her face. People didn't ask that question directly. They pretended to browse, to consider options, to choose based on preference rather than necessity. Admitting financial limitation required a particular kind of courage. Her expression shifted to something gentler. "We have the simple executive plate," she said without judgment in her tone. "Rice, beans, steak, and salad. It's $18. He nodded once. "That works." She wrote it down, then paused. "How would you like your steak prepared?" He almost smiled. She hadn't assumed that ordering the cheapest item meant he didn't deserve to have preferences. "Medium, please." "Perfect. I'll have that out for you soon." She didn't try to upsell him, didn't suggest appetizers or drinks or desserts. She simply accepted his order with the same attentiveness she'd shown the businessman in the expensive suit. As she walked toward the kitchen, he noticed something else. She moved with purpose but without hurry. She remembered which tables needed refills without constantly checking. She called the cook by name. "Carlos, 1 simple executive, medium on the steak." with familiarity that suggested mutual respect rather than just coworker proximity. The kitchen was visible through a service window. He watched the interaction. Carlos, a heavy-set man with forearms like tree trunks, nodded and immediately began preparing the order. No eye-rolling, no complaints about the cheap order taking up grill space, just professional acknowledgement. While he waited, the man observed the broader operation. The owner, he identified him easily by the proprietary way he stood at the register, was a thin man in his 50s with slicked back hair and a permanent expression of calculation. He watched his employees the way a prison guard watches inmates, looking for infractions rather than excellence. When a server asked him a question, his response was curt, dismissive. When a customer complimented the food, his smile was automatic and hollow. The man at table 14 noted this. He watched as the hostess finally looked up from her phone only when the owner glared at her. He watched as another server, an older woman with kind eyes, rushed between tables with barely controlled panic, trying to cover sections while undermanned. He watched as the owner pocketed cash payments without putting them through the register. But mostly, he watched the young woman who had taken his order. She was different. When the older server looked overwhelmed, she seamlessly took over 2 tables without being asked. When a toddler at table 12 dropped her fork for the 3rd time, she brought an entire handful of clean utensils and placed them just out of the child's reaching distance but within the mother's grateful grasp. When the businessman at table 3 made an inappropriate comment, the man at table 14 couldn't hear the words, but he saw the leer. She maintained her professionalism while creating physical distance, subtly positioning herself so the kitchen window was in her line of sight, where Carlos could see if she needed help. She had systems, survival strategies, the intelligence of someone who had learned to navigate difficult environments without losing her humanity in the process. 18 minutes after ordering, she appeared with his plate. The presentation was simple, but careful. The rice formed a neat mound. The beans hadn't splashed onto the salad. The steak was positioned thoughtfully. Nothing elaborate, but everything showed consideration. "Here you go," she said, setting it down gently rather than sliding it across the table as he'd seen her co-worker do. Carlos got it exactly medium. "If you need anything, hot sauce, extra napkins, anything at all, just let me know." "Thank you." She smiled again, that same genuine warmth. "You're welcome. Enjoy your meal." He watched her walk away to check on the elderly couple, who were now sharing a dessert and debating whether they'd ordered coffee. She didn't interrupt their conversation, just caught the old woman's eye and received a slight nod. Coffee was wanted. She disappeared to get it without forcing them to pause their discussion. The man at table 14 cut into his steak. Medium. Perfectly medium. The meal was simple, but well prepared. Nothing fancy. Nothing trying to be more than it was. Honest food, honestly made. He ate slowly, observing. The lunch rush began to build. Table turnover increased. The restaurant filled with the ambient noise of conversation, clattering dishes, and kitchen sounds. And through it all, she moved with quiet competence. He watched her handle a complaint from table 8. The steak was too well done. She didn't become defensive, didn't blame the kitchen, didn't make excuses. She apologized sincerely, took the plate back, and returned 7 minutes later with a perfectly cooked replacement and a small side of chimichurri sauce she'd requested from Carlos as a gesture of apology. The customer's irritation dissolved. He watched her navigate the owner's supervision. The thin man criticized her for spending too long at tables, for giving away the extra sauce, for not pushing more expensive items. She listened with downcast eyes and murmured agreement. But the moment he looked away, she continued doing exactly what she'd been doing. She had learned the art of appearing compliant while maintaining her integrity. He watched her help a new server, a teenage boy on perhaps his 2nd day, who had forgotten to put in an order. Instead of letting him panic or reporting him to the owner, she quickly added the item to her own ticket and split the delivery, making it appear as if they'd been working together all along. The boy's grateful expression said this wasn't the kind of help he expected in this environment. By the time the man at table 14 finished his meal, he had seen everything he needed to see. She appeared to clear his plate, How was everything? Perfect, he said honestly. Please tell Carlos the steak was cooked exactly right. Her smile brightened. He'll really appreciate hearing that. Can I get you anything else? Coffee? Dessert? Just the check, please. She pulled the small booklet from her apron and set it on the table. Discreetly turned so the total wasn't immediately visible. A small kindness for someone who'd ordered the cheapest item. No rush. Whenever you're ready. He opened it. $18. Exactly what she'd said. No mysterious service charges. No convenient mistakes that inflated the bill. Just honest accounting. He pulled exact change from his wallet. 18 rays in worn bills and coins. He left it in the booklet with no additional tip. When she returned to collect it, her expression didn't change. No disappointment flickered across her face. No sudden coldness entered her demeanor. No subtle shift in body language that communicated he was no longer worth her best effort. She counted the money efficiently and smiled the same warm smile she'd given him throughout the entire meal. Thank you so much. I hope we see you again soon. This was the real test. How someone treats you when they know there's nothing more to gain. When the transaction is complete and the potential for reward is gone, that's when you see character. She had passed. He stood up slowly, his joints protesting slightly. 62 years old, though he worked hard to maintain the posture and vitality of a younger man. He smoothed his worn shirt, expensive once, but that was 15 years ago, and looked at her directly. Can I ask you a question? Of course. If I told you I could change your life today, would you believe me? She laughed. Not a dismissive laugh, not a cruel laugh. A laugh born from experience, from disappointment, from hope that had been crushed too many times to risk sprouting again. Sir, if everyone who promised to change my life actually did it, I'd be living in a mansion by now. Her honesty was refreshing. No false enthusiasm, no desperate eagerness, just reality-tested wisdom. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. Simple, elegant, expensive cardstock that felt substantial between the fingers. He held it out to her. She took it, glanced down, and froze. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted slightly. The card trembled almost imperceptibly in her hand. Is this real? The name on the card belonged to one of the wealthiest men in the country. Antonio Ferreira Gomez, owner of the Gomez Hotel Group, 47 properties across South America, major investor in technology startups, restaurant chains, retail operations, known in business circles for appearing unannounced at companies he was considering acquiring, evaluating them from the inside before making 9-figure decisions. His face had been on magazine covers. His name appeared regularly in financial news, but those photos showed him in bespoke suits, standing in boardrooms, radiating the confidence and authority that came with wealth. The man in front of her, in his worn shirt and old shoes, looked nothing like those photos. She couldn't finish the sentence. I was evaluating this restaurant, he said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation remained private. Considering an acquisition. She felt her heart hammering. Was she about to lose her job? Would he fire everyone? Renovate and bring in an entirely new staff? I've been observing for 2 hours, he continued. The operation, the management, the staff, the culture. She waited, barely breathing, and I've made my decision. Silence stretched between them. The restaurant noise continued around them, dishes clanking, conversations humming, the register dinging. But in their bubble, everything was suspended. I'm not buying this restaurant. She blinked. Confusion replaced fear. You're not? No. He glanced at the owner, who was currently berating the older server for some minor infraction. I don't invest in operations where only money functions. I invest where character can sustain growth. He turned back to her, and his expression softened. I want to invest in you. The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced off her comprehension like a foreign language. I don't understand. I've spent 40 years building businesses, and I've learned that the foundation of any successful operation isn't the location or the menu or the marketing. It's the people. More specifically, it's leadership. He gestured subtly toward the dining room. In the past 2 hours, I've watched you demonstrate more genuine leadership than that man. He nodded toward the owner. Has probably shown in his entire career. You lead without authority. You solve problems without being asked. You treat every person with dignity, regardless of what they order or how much they tip. Those aren't skills you learn in business school. That's character. She shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. But I'm just a server. I never went to college. I don't have management experience. I don't have... You have what matters. He interrupted gently but firmly. Do you know how many people I've hired with impressive resumes and expensive degrees who couldn't do what you do? Who couldn't make that elderly couple feel valued while simultaneously preventing a new employee from having a panic attack while managing a difficult customer and maintaining your composure under an abusive boss? She stared at him. That's not luck. That's not talent. That's developed skill born from character. And it's exactly what I need. He pulled out a second card, this one blank on the back except for a handwritten phone number. I'm opening a new restaurant group. Smaller scale, higher quality, focused on treating both customers and staff with genuine respect. I need someone to help me build it from the ground up. Someone who understands service from the inside. Someone who leads naturally. He placed the card on the table between them. Call this number if you're interested. We can discuss salary, benefits, position. But I'll tell you up front, I'm offering you a management role with equity potential. This isn't just employment. This is partnership. She looked down at the cards in her hand like they were artifacts from another world. Why me? The question came out as a whisper. You don't know me. You watched me for 2 hours. That's not enough to... I've made billion real decisions on less, he said simply. And I've learned to trust what I see when people don't know they're being evaluated. You didn't treat me well because you knew who I was. You treated me well because that's who you are. Tears pricked at her eyes. She blinked them back hard. I have to think about this. Of course. Take all the time you need. But he glanced again at the owner, who was now pocketing cash from another table. Don't take too long. This place won't survive its own management much longer. She nodded, unable to speak. He smiled. A real smile. The kind that came from genuine pleasure rather than social obligation, and walked toward the exit. She stood there, holding 2 business cards and watching him leave, her mind spinning through 1,000 thoughts at once. Fear, hope, disbelief, possibility. Hey! She jumped. The owner was glaring at her from across the restaurant. Table 3 needs their check. Stop standing around daydreaming. She slipped the cards into her apron pocket and returned to work. But everything felt different now. The weight of possibility sat against her hip, tangible and terrifying. That night, she sat in her small apartment, a studio in a building where the elevator worked approximately half the time, and stared at the business cards on her coffee table. She'd looked him up online. The information confirmed everything. Antonio Ferreira Gomez. Net worth estimated at somewhere north of $800 million. Philanthropist, investor, known for unorthodox business strategies and for promoting from within his organizations. There were articles about his management philosophy. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, he'd said in one interview. You can have the best business plan in the world, but if your people don't embody your values, you'll fail. Another article mentioned his practice of visiting potential acquisitions incognito. You see the truth when people think no one important is watching, he'd explained. She should have been excited. This was the kind of opportunity that didn't happen to people like her. People who'd dropped out of college when their mother got sick. People who'd been working service jobs since they were 16. People who lived paycheck to paycheck and considered it a good month when they could save 50 Rs. But instead, she felt terrified. What if she failed? What if she was just a good server but terrible at management? What if his faith in her was misplaced and she disappointed him and ended up worse off than before? Her phone buzzed. A text from her coworker, the older woman who'd been rushing between tables. Owner cut my hours. Again, down to 20 a week now. I don't know how I'm going to make rent. She stared at the message, then at the cards, then back at the message. The owner had been systematically cutting hours, increasing workload, and pocketing money that should have gone to maintenance and proper staffing. The restaurant was dying slowly, and he was squeezing every last drop of profit before abandoning ship. She knew this. Everyone knew this. They just pretended not to, because they needed the work. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. It rang twice. Hello? His voice was warm, unsurprised. Mr. Gomez, this is the server from Sabor Casero, from today. I know who you are. Please call me Antonio. She took a breath. I want to accept your offer, but I need to know, is this real? Because if this is some kind of test or reality show or... It's real, he said gently. I understand your skepticism. People in your position have been promised things before and disappointed. I respect that you're protecting yourself. Would it help if we met formally? My office tomorrow, with employment contracts and my attorney present? Yes, she said, relief flooding through her. Yes, that would help. 10 a.m.? I work the lunch shift tomorrow. Not anymore, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I'll have my attorney send formal notice of your resignation to Sabor Casero tonight. You're officially employed by Gomes Restaurant Group as of this moment. She sat down hard on her couch. What's your salary requirement? He asked. She named a figure, triple what she was currently making, enough to seem ambitious but not greedy. He was quiet for a moment. I'm going to offer you 4 times that amount plus benefits plus 3% equity in the new venture. Does that work for you? She couldn't breathe. 4 times her current salary, equity, benefits. That's too much. I haven't proven. You proved everything that matters, he interrupted. The rest is just skills development, and I'll provide all the training you need. Do we have an agreement? Yes. The word came out choked. Yes, absolutely. Excellent. I'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. The address is on the card. And, he paused. Welcome to the team. I'm glad you called. After they hung up, she sat in silence for a long time, processing what had just happened. Her life had changed in less than 12 hours. From ordering the cheapest plate to being offered a management position with equity in a company owned by one of the wealthiest men in the country. It felt impossible. It felt terrifying. It felt like maybe, just maybe, kindness could be rewarded after all. 3 months later, Sabor Casero closed its doors permanently. The owner had continued his pattern of poor management, exploitation, and financial shortcuts until the health inspector found violations serious enough to force closure. The employees, already searching for other work because of cut hours and delayed paychecks, scattered to other restaurants across the city. The older woman who'd had her hours cut found work at the first location of Gomez's new restaurant group, where she managed the breakfast service and received full benefits for the first time in her career. The teenage boy who'd forgotten the order became a sous chef at the second location, attending culinary school at night with tuition assistance from the company. Carlos, the cook who'd prepared the perfect medium steak, became the head chef for the entire group, developing menus that honored simple, honest food made with respect. And she, the young woman who'd been serving tables and surviving in a toxic environment, stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the third location, wearing a professional suit that actually fit, addressing a crowd of food critics, local politicians, and business reporters. The Gomes Restaurant Group operates on a simple principle, she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. Every person who walks through our doors deserves respect. Every person who works in our kitchens and dining rooms deserves dignity. We believe that how you treat people when there's nothing to gain reveals everything about your character. Antonio stood in the back, watching her with quiet pride. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Santos, there's been speculation about how you went from server to chief operating officer in less than a year. Some industry insiders have suggested that favoritism or personal connections played a role. How do you respond to those criticisms? She smiled. Not defensive. Not apologetic, just confident. I respond by doing my job well every single day. Mr. Gomes took a chance on me based on what he observed, not on what my resume claimed. And I've worked harder than I've ever worked in my life to prove that his faith wasn't misplaced. Our success speaks for itself. 3 profitable locations in 3 months, industry-leading employee retention, and customer satisfaction scores that exceed every competitor in our market. She paused. If that's favoritism, I'll take it. The crowd laughed. The reporter nodded, satisfied. After the ceremony, Antonio approached her. You handled that well. I learned from the best, she said, then reconsidered. Actually, I learned from experience. You just gave me the opportunity to apply it. He smiled. Do you want to know something? Always. I almost didn't come to your restaurant that day. I had 3 other locations scouted. Better neighborhoods, stronger financials, more impressive operations. She raised her eyebrows. What changed your mind? I was sitting in traffic outside, running late, frustrated, and I saw you through the window. You were helping an elderly woman to her car, carrying her leftovers, making sure she didn't trip on the curb. You spent 5 minutes you didn't have making sure she was safe. No one was watching. No one would have known if you just waved goodbye from the door. He shook his head, remembering. That's when I knew I needed to see what kind of place employed people like you. And when I realized the place didn't deserve you, I decided to create one that did. She felt tears threatening again. She'd become more comfortable with emotion in the past months, learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing something I didn't know was there. It was always there, he corrected gently. I just gave you the platform to show it. Ni? Years later, when business school students study the Gomez Restaurant Group case study, they focused on the unconventional hiring practices, the emphasis on character over credentials, the investment in employee development. But Antonio, when asked about the company's success in rare interviews, always told the same story. I went to a small restaurant and ordered the cheapest item on the menu, he would say. And a young server treated me with the same respect she showed everyone else. That's the whole secret. Hire people who have integrity when no one's watching. Train them. Trust them. Get out of their way. Reporters would push for more strategy, more business insight, more actionable advice. And he would smile and repeat, character can't be taught in classrooms. It's forged through experience, choices, and circumstances. My job isn't to create character. It's to recognize it and give it room to flourish. Everything else is just details. The interviewer would usually look disappointed, as if they'd been promised a secret formula and received a platitude instead. But people who understood, people who'd built something real, something sustainable, something that mattered, they would nod in recognition, because they knew the truth that couldn't be captured in business models or strategic frameworks. A resume can be printed, credentials can be purchased, skills can be learned. But character is forged in the small moments when no one important is watching. In how you treat the elderly couple struggling with the menu, in whether you help the overwhelmed coworker or let them drown, in maintaining dignity when you can only afford the cheapest plate. Character is revealed in the space between who you are and who you could get away with being. And in that space, everything important is decided. The man who ordered the cheapest plate understood this, and so did the woman who served it to him with respect. That understanding, that shared recognition of what actually matters, became the foundation of something far more valuable than a successful restaurant chain. It became proof that kindness isn't weakness, that integrity isn't naivety, that treating people with dignity isn't just moral, it's strategic. And sometimes, just sometimes, the world rewards those who refuse to compromise their character, even when circumstance gives them every excuse to do so. The story of the cheapest plate became legend in their industry, a reminder that you never know who's watching, that every interaction matters, that success built on exploitation is temporary, but success built on respect can last generations. But for Antonio and the woman who became his business partner, the story was simpler than that. It was about seeing and being seen. It was about recognizing that the most valuable resources in any organization aren't financial or strategic. They're human. It was about understanding that the person serving your food, cleaning your office, answering your phones, might be exactly the person you need to build something extraordinary, if you're willing to look beyond the resume and see the truth. And that truth is always revealed the same way, in how someone treats you when there's nothing to gain. In the smallest gestures that require the largest character. In choosing dignity over convenience every single time. That's the story of the cheapest plate. And it changed everything.